Rain slammed violently against the windows of the small restaurant, turning the quiet street outside into a blur of flashing streetlights and rushing water. It was already past midnight, the kind of night when most people were home, asleep, far away from trouble. Inside the restaurant, only a few tired customers remained, quietly finishing their meals while soft music played in the background. Everything felt normal. Until the door suddenly burst open. The cold wind rushed in first, followed by a man, tall, dressed in a black suit that looked far too expensive for a place like this. His hair was soaked from the rain, his breathing heavy, and there was something else. Blood. Dark red blood slowly spreading across the side of his white shirt. For a moment, nobody moved. One customer froze with a spoon halfway to his mouth, but another woman slowly lowered her phone, staring in confusion. Even the kitchen went quiet as the man stumbled forward, his footsteps heavy against the wooden floor. He looked around the room as if searching for someone, or maybe trying to make sure no one had followed him. Then suddenly, his legs weakened. He reached out blindly, and his hand grabbed the wrist of the closest person standing beside him. A young black waitress, Amara Okoye. She gasped softly as his grip tightened, his hand trembling from pain. When she looked into his eyes, she expected to see anger, or fear, or maybe desperation. But what she saw instead made her heart skip. He looked exhausted, like a man who had been running for his life. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Just one kiss. The entire restaurant fell silent. Then he finished the sentence that would leave everyone in the room completely stunned. I need to feel alive again. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. No one could believe what they had just heard. A wounded stranger had just walked into a restaurant, grabbed a waitress, and asked her for a kiss as if it were the only thing keeping him alive. But what nobody in that room understood yet was that the bleeding man standing there wasn't just a desperate stranger. He was Kang Min-jae, a name whispered in dark corners of the city. A man powerful enough to make entire criminal organizations disappear overnight. And tonight, someone had tried to kill him. But here's the part that still shocks people who later heard this story. Yep, the waitress he grabbed, the one person he asked for help, was the last person anyone expected to get involved in a mafia war. Because just a few hours earlier, Amara Okoye had been nothing more than a quiet immigrant trying to finish her shift and send money back home to her family. She had no idea that the man holding her wrist was one of the most dangerous men in the city. And she definitely had no idea that before sunrise, people would start hunting her too. Now listen carefully, because this story takes a turn that even the detectives who later investigated it didn't see coming. There is a moment near the end of this story, a decision Amara makes, that changes everything between her and the wounded mafia boss. And when that moment finally comes, most people watching this story say the same thing. They never saw it coming. But before we go any further, I want to ask you something quickly. Stories like this reach people from all over the world, different countries, different cultures, all listening to the same moment unfold. So wherever you're watching from right now, take a second and write your country in the comments. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy stories filled with danger, unexpected connections, and twists that leave you speechless, consider subscribing to the channel. Because the next story we're preparing might be even more unbelievable than this one. Now, let's go back to the moment everything truly began. Because that rainy night, that quiet restaurant, and that single sentence spoken by a dying mafia boss was only the beginning of a story that would change two strangers' lives forever. Just a few hours before the wounded stranger burst through that restaurant door, Amara Okoye's night had been painfully ordinary. The kind of night that felt exactly like the hundreds of nights before it. Amara moved quietly between tables, balancing plates on one arm while wiping down empty seats with the other. Her shift had started in the late afternoon, and by now her feet were already aching inside her worn black shoes. But she never complained, because every hour she worked here meant something much bigger waiting thousands of miles away. Back home in Nigeria, her younger brother was trying to finish school. Her mother's small grocery shop had been struggling for months, and every few weeks, Amara would send whatever money she could spare back home. Sometimes it wasn't much, but to her family, it meant everything. Most customers in the restaurant never knew that story. To them, she was just another quiet waitress with a polite smile and a soft voice. But anyone who paid close attention would notice something different about Amara. She watched people carefully, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. Living alone in a foreign city had taught her one important lesson very quickly. Always be aware of your surroundings. And that habit would save her life later that night. That evening had started like any other shift. A few office workers came in after work, laughing loudly over drinks. A couple sat near the window sharing dessert. 2 college students argued over their phones while waiting for takeout. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. Just another quiet night inside a small restaurant that most people passed without even noticing. Amara moved between tables with practiced ease, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, offering polite smiles when customers thanked her. But every once in a while, her mind drifted far away from the restaurant. Back to her family, back to warm evenings in Lagos, back to the feeling of belonging somewhere. Living in a foreign country wasn't easy. Some nights were lonely, some customers were rude, and some days she wondered if all the hard work would eventually be worth it. But Amara had something many people didn't: patience. She believed that if she kept working, kept pushing forward, eventually life would reward her efforts. What she didn't know was that life had already planned something very different for her. Because somewhere else in the city, at that exact moment, a man was running for his life. A man whose name could make powerful people nervous. A man who had enemies everywhere. And before the night ended, his path would collide with Amara's in a way neither of them could ever have predicted. But before that moment came, something else happened inside the restaurant that most people didn't notice. 3 men quietly walked through the door. They didn't look unusual at first glance. Just 3 customers taking a table near the corner. They spoke very little. They didn't order much food, and every few minutes, one of them glanced toward the entrance, watching, waiting. Amara noticed them briefly while pouring tea at another table. Something about them felt strange. Not dangerous exactly, just tense, like men expecting something important to happen. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. Restaurants attract all kinds of customers, and it wasn't her job to question them. Still, that small feeling of unease stayed quietly in the back of her mind. And later, she would remember that moment very clearly. Because those 3 silent customers weren't there to eat. They were there for someone. Someone who hadn't walked through the door yet. Now think about this for a moment. If you had been in Amara's position that night, working quietly, trying to finish your shift, and 3 strangers walked in acting that suspicious, would you have ignored it? Or would you have trusted your instincts and paid closer attention? I'm curious what you would have done, because the truth is, sometimes the smallest decisions we make during an ordinary night can lead us directly into the most dangerous situations. And in just a few minutes, Amara Okoye was about to discover exactly how dangerous that night was going to become. Because the next person who walked through that restaurant door was the wounded man now gripping her wrist. Kang Min-jae. And the moment he stepped inside, everything changed. While Amara moved quietly between tables that night, trying to finish another long shift somewhere across the city, Kang Min-jae's night had already turned into a nightmare. Just hours earlier, Min-jae had been sitting in a private room on the top floor of an exclusive club that most ordinary people would never be allowed to enter. The lights were dim. Expensive whiskey sat untouched in front of him. And around the table were men who had followed him for years, men who called him boss. For nearly a decade, as Kang Min-jae had built a reputation that few people dared to challenge. In certain circles of the city, his name carried a strange kind of power. Business owners lowered their voices when mentioning him. Rival groups avoided crossing his territory. And those who betrayed him usually disappeared before sunrise. Min-jae wasn't the kind of man who raised his voice often. He didn't need to. A quiet command from him was usually enough to make entire rooms fall silent. But despite all that power, there was something about him most people never understood. He trusted very few people. In the world he lived in, loyalty was rare, and betrayal was always waiting somewhere in the shadows. And yet, even someone as careful as Kang Min-jae could make one mistake. That night, he had agreed to meet with a man he had trusted for almost 10 years. A man who had once saved his life. Director Han. To outsiders, Director Han looked like nothing more than a respectable businessman. He wore tailored suits, spoke calmly, and rarely showed emotion. But inside the organization, he was one of the few men powerful enough to stand beside Min-jae as an equal. The meeting had started normally. Quiet conversation, business updates. A few laughs shared between men who had worked together for years. But then something changed. Min-jae noticed it first. The subtle movement of someone's hand beneath the table. The way two guards at the door suddenly stepped outside at the same time. The room felt different. Heavy, uncomfortable. And then the gunshots came. 3 sharp explosions ripped through the quiet room before anyone could react. Chairs crashed to the floor. Glass shattered. Men shouted in confusion. Min-jae felt a burning pain explode through his side as the first bullet struck him. For a split second, the entire room spun, but instinct took over. He flipped the table forward, using it as cover as more shots tore through the air. By the time the smoke settled, 2 of his own men were already on the floor, dead. And the person standing calmly near the doorway, holding the smoking gun, was the last person he expected. Director Han, the man he had trusted for 10 years. For a moment, their eyes met across the room, and the betrayal was clear. Director Han didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. He simply adjusted his suit jacket and said something that would echo in Min-jae's mind for the rest of the night. "You built a powerful empire, Min-jae, but tonight it belongs to me." More men rushed into the room, prepared, waiting for the signal to finish the job. But they had underestimated one thing about Kang Min-jae. He had survived too many enemies to die easily. Ignoring the pain burning through his side, he kicked open a side door and forced his way into the service hallway behind the club. Gunshots followed him as he ran, down narrow staircases, through dark alleys, across rain-soaked streets. By the time he finally escaped the area, blood had already begun soaking through his shirt. Every step became heavier, every breath more painful. But stopping wasn't an option, because Min-jae understood something very clearly. If Director Han had betrayed him, then the entire organization would soon be hunting him. And there was nowhere in the city he could trust. Not his own headquarters, not his safe houses, not even his closest allies. So he kept moving through the rain, his vision growing blurry as the blood loss began to slow him down. Until finally, he saw the small restaurant glowing under the streetlights. It looked ordinary, quiet, the kind of place no one would expect a mafia boss to enter. And in that moment, with his strength fading and his enemies closing in, it was the only place he could reach. But here's the part that still surprises people who hear this story. Out of all the places Kang Min-jae could have collapsed that night, out of all the people he could have encountered in that final desperate moment, fate placed him directly in front of Amara Okoye, a young waitress who had absolutely nothing to do with his dangerous world. At least, not yet. Because when Min-jae finally pushed open that restaurant door, bleeding, exhausted, and barely able to stand, he had no idea that the woman he was about to grab for help would soon become the most important person in his fight to survive. And the moment he looked into her eyes and whispered those strange words, "Just one kiss. I need to feel alive again," the lives of 2 complete strangers became permanently connected. But what happened next inside that restaurant was something none of the customers there would ever forget. The moment Kang Min-jae pushed through that restaurant door, the entire atmosphere inside changed in a way no one could quite explain. Just seconds earlier, the place had been quiet and ordinary. Plates clinked softly against tables. A couple near the window laughed quietly over dessert. The kitchen door swung open and closed as cooks prepared the last few orders of the night. But when Min-jae stumbled inside, everything seemed to freeze. Rainwater dripped from his suit onto the floor. His breathing was heavy, uneven, and the faint metallic smell of blood slowly began spreading through the room. For a few seconds, nobody reacted. People simply stared. Amara was standing only a few feet away, holding a tray she had just picked up from the counter. At first, she thought the man might be drunk or maybe injured from a fight outside. But when he lifted his head slightly, their eyes met. And something about his expression made her heart tighten. It wasn't anger. It wasn't panic. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting too long without rest. Before she could even step back, Min-jae staggered forward. His legs almost gave out beneath him, and instinctively his hand shot out to steady himself. That was when his fingers wrapped around her wrist. The tray slipped from Amara's hand and crashed loudly onto the floor, plates shattering across the tiles. Several customers jumped to their feet. "Hey, are you okay?" someone shouted. Another man reached for his phone, already preparing to call emergency services, but Min-jae barely seemed aware of anyone else in the room. His grip on Amara's wrist tightened slightly, not in aggression, but in desperation. Up close, she could see just how pale he had become. His breathing was shallow, and beneath the rainwater soaking his clothes, dark red blood was slowly spreading through the fabric of his shirt. Then he spoke. His voice was weak, almost fading, but the words were clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. Just one kiss. For a moment, Amara thought she had misheard him. Yeah, but then he leaned slightly closer and finished the sentence. "I need to feel alive again." The restaurant went completely silent. Even the music playing overhead seemed to fade into the background as every person in the room stared in disbelief. A woman near the counter covered her mouth in shock. One man whispered under his breath, "Did he just ask her for a kiss?" Another customer laughed awkwardly, assuming the wounded stranger must be delirious. But Amara didn't laugh, because when she looked at Min-jae's face again, she realized something unsettling. He wasn't joking. His eyes were focused directly on hers, filled with a strange mixture of pain and determination. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Rain continued tapping against the windows outside. And somewhere in the kitchen, a pot lid clattered onto the floor as one of the cooks tried to see what was happening. Then suddenly, Min-jae's grip weakened. His body swayed dangerously, and before anyone could react, he collapsed forward. Amara barely managed to catch him before his head struck the floor. Gasps erupted across the room. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted immediately. A customer had already pulled out their phone, fingers trembling as they dialed for help. But as Amara struggled to support the wounded man, something strange caught her attention. Min-jae's hand moved again, weakly gripping the edge of her uniform. He pulled himself slightly closer, just enough to whisper something that no one else in the restaurant could hear. His voice was so faint that she had to lean down to understand him. "Yeah, you're the only one here," he paused, struggling to breathe. "I can trust." Amara froze. Those words didn't make sense. They had never met before. She was just a waitress. Why would a stranger suddenly trust her with something so serious? But before she could ask anything, something else happened that made her blood run cold. She glanced toward the corner of the restaurant. The three quiet men who had entered earlier were no longer pretending to eat. All three of them were watching the scene unfold with intense focus. Not concern, not confusion, expectation. And the moment their eyes met hers, one of them slowly reached into his jacket. In that instant, Amara realized something terrifying. Those men weren't just customers. They had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the wounded man now lying in her arms to collapse. And suddenly, the idea of calling the police didn't feel like help anymore. It felt like a trap. Now think about this for a second. If you were standing in Amara's place at that exact moment, holding a bleeding stranger while three suspicious men watched from across the room, would you stay and wait for help? Or would you run? Because the decision Amara was about to make in the next few seconds would pull her straight into a war she never knew existed. And once she made that choice, there would be no turning back. Amara's hands shook as she held Kang Min-jae's weight, his blood soaking through her uniform. The restaurant around them had fallen into uneasy silence. Customers whispered nervously, some dialing their phones, others frozen in fear. But Amara's attention was completely on him. Every instinct screamed at her to call the police, to step back, to let professionals handle this. Yet something inside her told her that this was no ordinary emergency. The three men in the corner weren't customers. Their movements, the way they watched, the subtle signals exchanged between them, it all made her stomach twist. These men weren't here to help. They were here to wait, to see, to strike. Min-jae's breathing grew more labored. His hand, still weakly clutching her wrist, barely moved. "You don't have to," he tried to whisper, voice faltering, but he stopped, eyes pleading. Amara's heart raced. She looked around the restaurant. The door to the outside world was just a few feet away. She could drop him, run, call for help. She could save herself. That would be the easy choice. But then she thought about the way he looked at her. Not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as someone who could save him, someone he trusted. And suddenly, fear was no longer her guiding emotion. Something else took over, something stronger, determination. Without another thought, she lifted him carefully, leaning against her own body to support his weight. Every second counted. One misstep, one stumble, and he could slip from her hands. One glance from the men in the corner told her they would be ready to act at the slightest mistake. Her mind raced. Where could she go? She couldn't call the police. They would be his enemy's next target. The restaurant was too exposed. She needed somewhere safe, somewhere private, somewhere only she knew. Her apartment. It was small, yes, barely enough space for one person, but it was hers. And for tonight, it would have to be enough to hide him. With every step toward the back exit, at her heart pounded. Rainwater mixed with blood dripped onto the floor, marking their path. She could feel the weight of his presence, and yet, oddly, it didn't feel like a stranger she was carrying. It felt like she had stepped into someone else's life. And in that life, her choices mattered. As they reached the alley behind the restaurant, the distant sound of voices and footsteps echoed faintly, carried by the rain. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. She paused for a split second. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to leave him behind, to save herself. But looking down at Min-jae's pale, exhausted face, she made her choice. "I won't let them take you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. With a deep breath, she helped him climb the steps toward her apartment, as navigating through the narrow streets where the shadows seemed alive. Every corner could hide danger. Every passing car could be an enemy. And yet, as they moved, she realized something unexpected. This wasn't just about saving a wounded man. This was about stepping into a story far bigger than herself. A story where courage, trust, and loyalty would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. At the same time, Min-jae, barely able to speak, looked at her and said quietly, almost reverently, "You shouldn't have done this." She only shook her head. "Neither should you have come here alone." The weight of what they had just done, of what she had chosen, began to settle in. And as the door to her apartment closed behind them, locking them in temporary safety, a thought struck her. Yes, she had no idea just how dangerous this decision would make her life, or how deeply it would pull her into the world of a man who trusted no one, except her. But one thing was certain. Once she chose to help him, there was no going back. And the night wasn't over yet. Because outside, in the shadows, someone was already tracking them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Amara had unknowingly stepped into the crosshairs. Her choice had changed everything. Would she survive the night? Would her courage be enough to keep both of them alive? Only time would tell. And what happened next would shock even those who had thought they understood the dangerous world Kang Min-jae inhabited. As soon as Amara closed the door to her tiny apartment behind them, she leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. The adrenaline from the escape was still coursing through her veins, and every shadow seemed alive with possibility. Min-jae slumped onto the small couch, groaning softly. His face was pale, sweat mixing with the dried streaks of blood, and his hand pressed desperately to the wound on his side. Every breath was a struggle, but there was no time to rest. Not yet. Amara began carefully removing his wet jacket to examine the damage. That's when something fell from the inner pocket. A small, sleek black device, unlike anything she had seen before. A phone? A tracker? She picked it up and held it gingerly, her heart pounding. Min-jae noticed immediately. "Don't touch that," he rasped, his voice weak but sharp. "It's important." She hesitated, looking at him. His piercing eyes met hers for a brief second, and in that moment, as she realized there was more to this man than anyone could have guessed. The bloodied, wounded stranger was carrying secrets far beyond what she had imagined. Curiosity overtook caution. She switched it on. A message blinked across the screen. The words were short, but their meaning was chilling. "Find the girl with him. She saw everything." Amara froze. Her eyes widened as she turned to look at Min-jae. He was breathing shallowly, watching her every reaction, and for the first time, his calm, commanding aura was gone. Vulnerability had taken over, but it carried an edge. Dangerous, unpredictable. "You're not just helping me survive," he whispered hoarsely. "You're now part of this." Her stomach twisted. Part of this? What did that mean? She had only helped him because she saw a wounded man in need. Like she hadn't agreed to be dragged into a war she didn't understand. Min-jae's eyes darted toward the window. "They know. They're already tracking us. Whoever sent that message, they know you're here. That's why I can't call anyone. Not the police, not my people." Amara's heart raced. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She hadn't only saved a life, she had inadvertently made herself a target. The realization hit hard. Every step she took from now on, every word she said could be observed. Every decision mattered. "And now," Min-jae continued, voice strained, "we have to move carefully. Because the second they figure out where we are, they won't hesitate to come for you. For me, it's death. For you, it could be even worse." Amara swallowed hard, the adrenaline mixing with fear. She had thought this night was about saving a man. Now she understood. It was about survival. Her survival. His survival. And the dangerous secrets hidden inside that small black device. She looked at him. What is this?" "It's a warning," he said, struggling to sit upright. "And a key. A key to understanding why my people betrayed me, and why your life is now tied to mine." For the first time, Amara realized the gravity of her decision. What had started as a simple act of compassion had plunged her into a world where trust was scarce. Betrayal was deadly, and every secret carried a price. And just when she thought she could process it all, the small device buzzed again. Another message appeared. "Do not underestimate her. She knows too much now." Amara's pulse quickened. Min-jae looked at her, eyes narrowing. They're coming for you," he said quietly. "And soon." At that moment, she knew there was no turning back. The night that began as a quiet shift for a young African waitress had become a collision with danger, secrets, and a world she never imagined existed. And the person she had saved? The man she had trusted, who had asked her for a kiss just hours ago. He was now her only chance at survival, because the secret in his pocket had changed everything. And the moment she realized what it really meant, would lead them both straight into a trap far more dangerous than anything they could have anticipated. The apartment was silent, save for the sound of rain tapping against the window pane. Amara had set Min-jae down on the small couch, carefully applying pressure to his wound as best she could. Her hands were trembling, not just from the adrenaline, but from the knowledge that they weren't safe. Not yet. Min-jae leaned back, breathing shallowly, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then, almost as if the words themselves were painful to release, he began to explain. "The people I trusted most," he said quietly, voice strained. The people I built everything with. They turned on me. Amara's eyes widened. Turned on you? But why? Who would do this? He shook his head, a faint grimace crossing his face. It's never just one person. Betrayal is rarely simple. He paused, pain flaring across his features. The man who set this up, Director Han. He's someone I considered a brother. 10 years of loyalty, gone in an instant. Amara's stomach tightened. She had thought her decision to help him was dangerous, but now, had she realized just how tangled this world truly was? The man she had saved. He had enemies everywhere, and some of them were closer than she ever imagined. Before she could even respond, the small black device, the one that had already warned her she was being tracked, buzzed again. A new message appeared. You should never have trusted that waitress. Amara froze. Her hands trembled as she set the device down. She looked at Min-jae, confusion and fear etched on her face. What does that mean? Min-jae's eyes narrowed. It means, he said slowly, that the betrayal doesn't stop with me. Someone inside my own network has been watching you, noticing your actions, your movements. They know you helped me, and now you're part of the game. The air seemed to thicken. Amara swallowed hard. The room felt suddenly smaller, darker. A part of the game, she whispered. You mean they're going to come for me? He didn't answer immediately. He simply closed his eyes, a brief moment of pain flashing across his face. Then he looked at her, eyes sharp, urgent. Yes, and worse. The people hunting me right now, they aren't just after me. They're after anyone who interfered, anyone who stepped in. Amara's mind raced. The adrenaline, the fear, the responsibility she now carried, it was overwhelming. She had wanted only to help a man in need, and now her life was in the hands of someone she barely knew. And then came the chilling realization. The person who had betrayed Min-jae, the one who had sent that warning about her. They were watching them right now. Possibly inside the building, possibly somewhere else, waiting for the perfect moment. Min-jae leaned forward, her voice low but deadly serious. Amara, I need you to understand something. Tonight, you made a choice that changed everything. And now, our enemies won't hesitate to exploit that choice. A sudden noise outside the apartment door made them both tense. A soft click, almost imperceptible, echoed in the hallway. Someone was approaching. Amara's heart raced. She gripped Min-jae's arm, her mind screaming for a plan, any plan. He looked at her, eyes sharp and calculating despite the pain. They're here for you first. They're testing me, seeing what I'll do. But if I move wrong, if we hesitate, it will cost both of us everything. For the first time, Amara understood the true weight of the night. This wasn't just about helping a wounded man. This wasn't just about loyalty or courage. This was survival, on a scale she had never imagined. And the terrifying truth was undeniable. The real betrayal wasn't just about Min-jae, it was about her. Someone she had never suspected, someone she might have even trusted inside that restaurant, had marked her, had set this all in motion. And in that moment, as the soft sound of footsteps grew closer in the hallway, Amara realized that the night wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about who she could trust, because the wrong decision would be the last one she ever made. And as the first knock hit the apartment door, the air thick with suspense, she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The betrayal had begun, and she was at the center of it. The faint echo of footsteps in the hallway sent a chill down Amara's spine. Each step was deliberate, measured, and terrifyingly close. Her hands were still trembling from the revelations of betrayal. Min-jae sat upright on the couch, his eyes sharp despite the blood and exhaustion etched across his face. They're here, he said quietly, almost to himself. They found us. Amara's heart pounded. She clutched the small pistol he had handed her earlier, still unsure if she had the courage to use it. The men outside were professionals, calculating, deadly, and patient. Every sound they made was a warning. A soft knock at the door, then another, louder this time. Min-jae rose slowly, his hand brushing against her arm. "Listen carefully," he whispered. "I've been in situations far worse than this, but tonight, it's different. They're not here for me, they're here for you." Amara froze. "For me?" Her voice trembled. "But I'm just a waitress." He shook his head. "Not anymore. As you stepped into my world, you saved my life, and now, that makes you a target." Another knock came at the door, followed by the sound of keys rattling in the lock. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Min-jae. "What do we do?" Min-jae's gaze hardened. "We don't wait. We prepare." He moved toward the small cabinet and pulled out a few items. Bullets, makeshift barricades, and a small bag. Then he looked at her. "I need you to trust me, just like I trusted you." Amara nodded slowly, gripping the pistol tighter. Fear gnawed at her, but determination burned brighter. She had chosen this path. She couldn't turn back now. The doorknob rattled violently. A voice from the other side hissed, "We know you're in there. Step out and it'll be easier for you." Amara's pulse raced. Her mind was a whirlwind of panic. But she remembered Min-jae's earlier words. Survival depended on her courage. Every instinct told her to run, but running wasn't an option, not now. Min-jae moved to the door, placing a hand on hers. "When I say now, we move together. No mistakes." The hallway was silent for a moment. Then footsteps shifted slightly, signaling that the men outside were preparing to break in. Amara swallowed her fear. She had never imagined holding a gun in her hands, never imagined being in a fight for her life, and certainly never imagined being the most important person to a notorious Korean mafia boss. The first kick hit the door. Wood splintered under the force. Amara and Min-jae held their ground. "Ready?" he whispered. She nodded, heart hammering. "And remember," he said softly, almost a warning. Once this starts, there's no going back." The door splintered again. The men outside were pushing, forcing their way in, and as the first shadow crossed the threshold, Amara realized something chilling. The people she had thought were customers, the ones quietly watching earlier in the restaurant, they had been waiting for this moment all along. Now there was no room for hesitation. Every second counted. And as Min-jae took a step forward to protect her, Amara knew that the night was far from over. Because what happened next would reveal the true danger of stepping into a world ruled by loyalty, betrayal, and deadly secrets. And in that moment, she understood fully. She was no longer just a bystander. She was a target. And survival would demand everything she had. The shattered door swung inward, splinters scattered across the floor, and the men, 3 imposing figures dressed in black, stepped into the apartment, their eyes fixed on Min-jae and Amara. Adrenaline surged through Amara's veins, but her focus remained razor-sharp. Every step, every breath could decide who survived tonight. Min-jae moved in front of her, shielding her with his body despite the pain in his side. The men circled slowly, like predators sizing up prey. And then, just as Amara's heart threatened to explode from fear, one of the intruders spoke. "Step aside, Min-jae. She doesn't need to die tonight." Amara's head snapped toward the voice. Something about the tone, it was familiar. Too familiar. Her mind raced. Min-jae's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp despite exhaustion. The man in black stepped into the light. And in that instant, Amara gasped so loudly she almost dropped the pistol. It was Director Han, the man who had betrayed Min-jae, the man who had orchestrated the assassination at the club, the man she had believed was a distant enemy now standing in her living room. Her mind reeled. How was he here? How had he tracked them so fast? How had he known exactly where to strike? Then came the words that shattered everything Amara thought she knew about the night. "You don't understand, little waitress," Director Han said, his voice cold and measured. "You were never a target. Not really." Amara froze. What? What do you mean?" Min Jae's gaze shifted between her and Han, suspicion and anger burning in his eyes. Han smiled faintly. "I needed her to trust him." Amara's stomach dropped. She looked at Min Jae. What? What does that mean?" Han continued, stepping closer. "From the moment he walked into your restaurant, from the moment he collapsed in your arms, everything was a test. A test of loyalty, courage, and instinct. And guess what?" Amara's chest tightened, fear mixing with confusion. "A test for who?" Han's smile widened. "For him. And for you. You were never supposed to be collateral damage. You were supposed to save him. And you did. Perfectly." Min Jae's expression twisted with shock, disbelief, and something darker. A realization that the night had been manipulated far beyond his control. "You," he began, voice low and dangerous, but Han cut him off. "Think carefully, Min Jae," Han said. "Every move you made, every decision, it was all being watched. And the one person who made the difference wasn't me. It wasn't your enemies. It was her." Amara looked at Min Jae, her hands trembling. "It was me?" Han nodded, almost approvingly. "You chose to trust. You chose to act. You chose to save a life that could have been lost if you hesitated. That's the kind of decision no one can fake. And that's why he's alive." Min Jae's eyes softened, a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and relief washing over his features. For the first time since the night began, he allowed himself to exhale. Then Han stepped back, raising a hand in dismissal. "I'll leave you two for now, but remember this. What just happened? It changes everything. The world you're in, it's more dangerous than you think. And now, she belongs to it just as much as you do." Amara's mind reeled. The betrayal, the danger, the adrenaline, it all shifted in a single moment. She had thought the night was about survival, us about protecting a wounded man from enemies. But the real plot twist was that she had passed the ultimate test. And in doing so, she had unknowingly stepped into a world of power, secrets, and loyalty, where her choices now mattered more than anyone had ever realized. Min Jae reached for her hand, blood still staining his fingers. "You saved me. And somehow, you changed everything tonight." Amara swallowed hard, realizing the truth she could not ignore. The woman who had simply wanted to do the right thing had become the one person who could alter the fate of a Mafia empire. And as the rain continued to pour outside, Amara understood that her life would never, ever be ordinary again. Because in a world ruled by betrayal, power, and deadly secrets, the real shock was not what she had done. The real shock was what she was about to become. The apartment fell silent again, the only sound the relentless patter of rain against the windows. Amara's hands were still trembling, but not from fear. This time, it was from the weight of what she had just discovered. She had saved a man, survived an ambush, uncovered betrayal, and now, she had passed a test she didn't even know existed. Min Jae sat beside her, exhaustion painted across his face, yet his eyes burned with a quiet intensity. "You've done more than anyone could have imagined," he whispered, voice hoarse. "But this isn't over." Amara's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? I thought we're safe for now." He shook his head slowly. "Safe is a word that doesn't exist for people like us. Those men, the ones who came tonight, they were just the beginning. Someone much bigger is watching. Someone who will not forgive and will not wait." Amara's heart raced as a chill ran down her spine. The thought of another enemy, far more dangerous than the ones they'd already faced, made her pulse hammer. "And there's something else," Min Jae continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Something I haven't told you. Someone you trust, maybe even yourself, might not be what they seem. And when the time comes, you'll have to make a choice that could change everything. Or lose everything. Amara looked at him, confusion and fear warring with determination. A choice? She asked softly. Yes, he said, staring out the rain-streaked window. A choice that will define not just our lives, but the entire empire surrounding us. And you will play a bigger role than you could ever imagine. A sudden noise from outside the apartment made them both freeze. A faint, deliberate tapping at the window. Slow. Calculated. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. Amara's hands tightened around Min Jae's. We're not done yet, are we? He shook his head. Not even close. The camera of your mind lingers on that rain-soaked window, and just as the suspense reaches its peak, the screen goes dark. Who's outside? What will they do next? And how far will Amara go to survive a world she never asked to enter? The answers are coming, but only if you stay tuned for the next video.